When American forces first entered World War II, few in the German High Command imagined they would one day face an enemy capable of shaking their morale. The Wehrmacht of 1941 and 1942 was a seasoned instrument, battle-tested across Europe, confident in its doctrine, and led by officers hardened by campaigns in Poland, France, and the Soviet Union. By comparison, the United States Army was still assembling itself. Its soldiers were young, its officers inexperienced, and its formations untested in large-scale conflict. German assessments at the time reflected this imbalance. Reports circulated within the Abwehr and Wehrmacht command suggesting that American troops lacked battlefield instincts and would crumble under sustained pressure. The early clashes seemed to confirm these assumptions. Kasserine Pass in February 1943 marked a painful introduction to modern warfare for the U.S. Army. German armored thrusts broke American lines, exposed weaknesses in communication, and revealed a force still learning how to fight a mechanized opponent. Yet, beneath these failures was something the Germans underestimated: the American ability to learn quickly and decisively. Unlike many armies molded by tradition, the U.S. military approached war as a problem to be solved. After Kasserine, American commanders initiated sweeping reforms. Training intensified, units were reorganized, leaders who hesitated were replaced. Manuals were rewritten to emphasize flexibility, aggressive maneuver, and the mental resilience required for prolonged combat. Soldiers were taught not merely to follow orders, but to adapt to rapidly changing circumstances. This evolution became more visible during the Sicily campaign in mid-1943. German units engaging American forces noted an undeniable shift. The U.S. infantry, once hesitant, now pressed attacks with greater confidence. When pinned down, they reorganized rather than retreated. When met with counterattacks, they answered with force and persistence. American persistence did not yet match Soviet endurance or German tactical finesse, but the change in attitude was unmistakable. The Italian campaign extended this trend. The battles at Salerno, Anzio, and Monte Cassino tested the Americans in some of the most grueling terrain of the war. German paratroopers and panzer grenadiers held defensive positions with deadly skill. Yet, U.S. forces repeatedly returned to the fight. Units battered during the day launched renewed attacks at dawn. Soldiers who had endured artillery barrages, mud-choked trenches, and close-quarter fighting pressed onward with steady determination. German officers began to note this in their reports. One battalion commander wrote that the Americans do not yield easily, while another observed that U.S. attacks continue after losses where other armies pause. These were not compliments. They were warnings. An enemy capable of enduring hardship and returning to battle stronger represented a threat that could not be dismissed. Yet the true turning point, the moment when German forces realized the full scope of American determination, would come only after the Allies prepared for the invasion of Western Europe. Throughout the spring of 1944, American divisions trained relentlessly in England. Field exercises grew more realistic. Live fire rehearsals simulated the chaos of close combat. Airborne units practiced night operations under grueling conditions. Engineers drilled assault techniques for fortified positions. Armored divisions refined rapid breakthrough tactics designed to exploit any breach. American soldiers understood they would face the most fortified defensive system in Europe. They also knew they had to break through it, no matter the cost. By June 1944, German commanders stationed along the Atlantic Wall sensed the Americans were better trained, better equipped, and more capable than they had been in any previous campaign. But what they could not yet see was the transformation taking place in the mindset of the U.S. Army. The shift from cautious fighting to unthinkable determination. It was this evolution in spirit and resolve that would soon collide with German defenses in Normandy, setting the stage for the fear, shock, and collapse that followed. As 1944 unfolded, the U.S. Army underwent one of the most dramatic evolutions of any fighting force in the Second World War. What had begun as a vast but inexperienced army was now maturing into a highly coordinated machine, driven by leaders who understood that victory required more than numbers. It required a mindset capable of sustaining pressure under the harshest battlefield conditions. The transformation started at the top. General Dwight D. Eisenhower unified Allied strategy while delegating aggressive operational reforms to leaders such as Omar Bradley, who oversaw the American ground forces for the Normandy landings, and George S. Patton, whose philosophy of relentless momentum would shape the future battles of 1944. Patton especially pushed his troops through brutal training regimens, instilling a culture where attack was the default posture and hesitation considered unacceptable. This leadership style filtered down through every level of the U.S. Army. Junior officers were encouraged to take initiative in chaotic situations, an approach that contrasted sharply with the rigid structure German commanders expected from their adversaries. Non-commissioned officers, often the backbone of American platoons, were trained to reorganize units, maintain morale, and continue missions even when higher command structures broke down. These reforms aligned perfectly with the American industrial and logistical advantages. Troops trained with abundant ammunition, allowing them to practice sustained fire and rapid assault techniques that would later shock German defenders. Engineers became crucial to the offensive doctrine, developing methods to breach fortifications, clear obstacles, and support armored thrusts with a level of technical expertise unmatched by most Axis armies. German intelligence units noted these changes, though many interpreted American improvements as incremental rather than transformative. Reports indicated sharper American movement, better tactical cohesion, and increased confidence, but few German commanders anticipated how deeply this shift would influence battlefield behavior. The assumption persisted that American troops, despite their resources, lacked the hardened resolve of German veterans. Then came Normandy. On June 6, 1944, the U.S. 1st and 29th Infantry Divisions stormed Omaha Beach in one of the bloodiest landings of the war. German defenders initially believed the assault would fail. Yet, American soldiers, pinned down, battered by machine gun fire, and scrambling over mined obstacles, continued moving forward with grim determination. Small groups reorganized under fire. Destroyed units were replaced by fresh assault waves. Where one platoon was cut down, another advanced through the chaos. German reports from the day described the attackers as unwilling to retreat, continuing forward despite severe losses, and pressing the attack under impossible conditions. The assumption that American forces lacked battlefield endurance crumbled on the slopes overlooking Omaha Beach. But the most revealing battles were still ahead. As U.S. troops pushed inland, they encountered the tangled hedgerow terrain that favored German defensive tactics. Expecting the Americans to falter in close, claustrophobic fighting, German commanders again misjudged their enemy. Instead, U.S. infantry adapted rapidly, employing new assault techniques, coordinating with armor, and fighting with persistence that stunned their opponents. By late June, German officers were reporting something deeper than tactical skill. The Americans were showing sustained determination, a refusal to break even after repeated failures. Angle 3. How the enemy saw it. German perception of American determination. Perhaps the clearest window into American battlefield behavior comes from German records themselves. By mid-1944, reports from frontline officers displayed a growing anxiety about the mindset of U.S. soldiers. These were not the hesitant troops they had faced in 1943. They were fighters who advanced under fire, reorganized quickly, and refused to relinquish ground once gained. German infantry across the Western Front noted a pattern. American troops kept advancing even after heavy losses, launched repeated attacks without pause, and displayed exceptional endurance in close combat. For a German army stretched thin and suffering from shortages, the sight of an enemy who fought as if exhaustion did not exist was deeply unsettling. In several engagements, German units described American soldiers crawling forward under machine gun fire, storming through gaps blasted open moments earlier, or pressing attacks late into the evening, times when most armies would withdraw to reset. This relentlessness became a psychological weapon. The fear was not rooted in American numbers or tanks alone, but in the sense that the Americans simply could not be stopped. This perception, born from repeated encounters, began eroding German morale even before major breakthroughs occurred. And it set the stage for the deeper angles that shaped the decisive turning points of the campaign. Angle 4. Firepower and tools of momentum. The machinery behind American determination. Behind the determination of the American soldier stood a powerful array of weapons and logistical support that amplified their relentless drive. German troops often described American assaults as endless, not because U.S. units were infinite in number, but because their firepower rarely faltered. Ammunition flowed with consistency. Artillery responded within minutes. Machine guns fired sustained bursts without fear of rationing. The M1 Garand, semi-automatic and rugged, gave U.S. infantry a significant rate of fire advantage over German bolt-action rifles. In close-quarter hedgerow fighting, this difference proved crucial. American soldiers could lay down fast, suppressive fire as they advanced, giving them confidence to push through enemy lines with aggressive precision. Artillery, the backbone of American doctrine, became a decisive force. German diaries frequently described sudden and accurate barrages landing within seconds of U.S. troops calling for support. The speed and reliability of American fire missions eroded German confidence. Defensive positions that might have held against another army were shattered within minutes. Tanks added another layer. Sherman groups moved in coordinated formations, not individually. Even when facing German Panther or Tiger tanks, their numbers, speed, and mechanical reliability created momentum that Germans struggled to stop. This combination of tools and determination made every American attack feel larger than it was, a powerful illusion reinforced by fire and steel. Angle 5. Leadership that demanded relentlessness. Commands that forged willpower. American determination was not accidental. It was shaped deliberately by leaders who believed victory depended on constant pressure. General Omar Bradley favored steady, methodical advances that wore down German defenses. General George Patton, in contrast, demanded speed, aggression, and an unyielding offensive spirit. Both philosophies fused across the U.S. Army, producing units capable of adapting to battlefield chaos while pushing forward relentlessly. American officers were taught not to freeze when plans fell apart. Instead, they were expected to improvise, redirect attacks, and maintain momentum. This flexibility contrasted sharply with German expectations that Americans required strict orders. When German forces disrupted communications, they expected hesitation. Instead, American units pressed forward with renewed force, often surprising defenders who assumed the attack would collapse. NCOs carried enormous responsibility. Sergeants reorganized squads under fire, motivated troops through exhaustion, and ensured that every man understood the importance of the mission. German observers repeatedly expressed surprise at how quickly American units recovered leadership after casualties. If an officer fell, another immediately stepped forward. This continuity made American determination feel inexhaustible. By mid-1944, U.S. leadership had forged a fighting culture centered on persistence, resolve, and aggressive initiative, qualities that would reach their full expression in the battles ahead. Angle 6. Psychological impact. Why German morale crumbled before the breakthrough. The final angle, perhaps the most decisive, was psychological. By the time American forces pushed deeper into Normandy, many German units were already mentally frayed. They were exhausted from constant fighting, short on supplies, and burdened by the knowledge that reinforcements were scarce. Facing an enemy who refused to slow only magnified these pressures. When German soldiers fired on American advances, they expected hesitation. Instead, they watched U.S. troops reorganize instantly and push forward again, seemingly undeterred by casualties. This refusal to break created an impression of unstoppable force. For defenders trained to exploit weakness, discovering none was deeply unsettling. Every failed counterattack, every shattered position, every sudden American barrage chipped away at their confidence. German commanders began reporting that their soldiers were losing the will to resist in the face of American persistence. The enemy's determination was not just defeating them physically, it was breaking them psychologically. By July, this psychological strain reached a point where German units could sense the coming collapse long before it materialized in the decisive battles of the campaign. These conditions created the perfect environment for the climax, where American determination would transform from a battlefield trait into a force capable of breaking the entire German line. July 1944, Normandy, France. For weeks, the hedgerow country had tested every skill and instinct the Americans possessed. The terrain favored the Germans: ancient earthen walls, thick vegetation, narrow lanes, perfect for ambushes and defensive fire. German machine gunners and panzer grenadiers turned these natural fortifications into lethal pockets of resistance. Many expected the Americans to slow, lose momentum, or even withdraw to reorganize. But that never happened. On the approaches to St. Lo, one of the most fiercely contested towns in Normandy, American determination reached a new intensity. German units defending the bocage knew the Americans were coming. Their artillery rumble, their tank engines, their shouted commands cutting through the morning haze. But what shocked them was not the presence of the Americans. It was the way they fought. At dawn on July 11, 1944, U.S. infantry launched an assault against several hedgerow positions west of the town. German defenders, concealed in excellent cover, opened fire immediately. Under normal doctrine, an attacking force would stop, reorganize, and prepare a more measured advance. Instead, American squads surged forward. Small fire teams flanked hedgerows, blasting openings with explosives. Engineers used bungalow torpedoes and tank-mounted cutters to breach the walls that had stalled them days earlier. Sherman tanks pushed through narrow gaps with reckless determination, their tracks grinding over roots and stones as they forced their way deeper into German defenses. German soldiers wrote later that the Americans advanced as if nothing could deter them. Even when caught in crossfire, The situation worsened dramatically as American armored divisions entered open country. No longer confined to the hedgerows, U.S. tanks and mechanized infantry moved with explosive acceleration. Columns swept through villages, bypassing strongpoints and striking deep into rear areas. German communications disintegrated. Orders could not reach frontline troops. Entire regiments found themselves surrounded before they understood what was happening. In the midst of this chaos came the event that broke German morale: the creation of the Falaise Pocket. Throughout early August, Allied forces closed in on German units retreating from Normandy. American, British, Canadian, and Polish troops advanced from multiple directions, compressing the German 7th Army and 5th Panzer Army into a shrinking corridor east of Falaise. Inside this tightening ring, tens of thousands of German soldiers struggled to escape. Roads clogged with abandoned vehicles. Fuel shortages immobilized tanks. Artillery batteries sat silent, unable to fire more than a few shells. American forces attacking from the south demonstrated the same determination that had defined their approach to St. Lo. Infantry stormed ridgelines and villages with unwavering resolve. Armor blocked escape routes with precise movements. Artillery fell in relentless patterns, cutting down retreating columns and choking every attempt to break free. German diaries from the pocket reflect the collapse in spirit. They attack without fear. They are everywhere. We cannot stop them. We do not understand how they continue to advance. These were not poetic exaggerations. They were the honest observations of soldiers whose armies were being overwhelmed by the sustained, unthinkable determination of the U.S. Army. By August 21, 1944, the Falaise Pocket closed. The result was catastrophic. Tens of thousands of German soldiers killed or captured. Nearly all remaining vehicles abandoned. Entire divisions erased from the order of battle. The German army in France was not merely defeated, it was broken. And the psychological impact of that defeat reached far beyond the battlefield. German commanders now understood that they were facing an enemy who would attack through exhaustion, through losses, through fire. An enemy who did not pause, did not hesitate, and did not yield. The Americans had become the driving force of the Western Front, propelled by a determination that swept aside resistance, shattered morale, and set the stage for the collapse that followed. The consequences of this breakthrough would reshape the remainder of the war. The destruction of German forces in Normandy marked a turning point not only in the military campaign, but in the psychological landscape of the war. For the first time on the Western Front, the German army faced an opponent whose determination did not waver, whose pace did not slow, and whose resolve appeared to intensify with every victory. The impact of this realization rippled through every level of the Wehrmacht. In the weeks following the collapse of the Falaise pocket, American mechanized divisions surged across France at a speed that defied German expectations. What had once been a grinding struggle through hedgerows transformed into an open country pursuit. German commanders, struggling with fuel shortages and battered units, attempted to re-establish defensive lines, but the Americans refused to give them the time. Towns that the Germans believed could hold for days fell in hours. Defensive roadblocks were swept aside by coordinated armor infantry teams moving with practiced efficiency. When German forces mounted counterattacks, they encountered the same relentless American determination that had defined the battles in Normandy. U.S. units met every push with overwhelming firepower, rapid regrouping, and immediate counterthrusts. German intelligence summaries from late August and early September reveal a shift in tone. Instead of analyzing Allied tactics alone, they increasingly focused on the extraordinary persistence and uninterrupted offensive pressure. One report warned that the Americans continue all attacks with unwavering determination, while another noted that German units were exhausted and discouraged by the enemy's pace. This psychological break was reinforced by the visible signs of collapse. Retreating German soldiers saw abandoned vehicles, lost artillery, and scattered units unable to reform. They saw American mechanized columns pushing east with confidence, supported by a logistical network that provided fuel, food, and ammunition at a tempo Germany could no longer match. The contrast was devastating. American forces appeared tireless. German forces felt depleted. American commanders pushed forward aggressively. German officers struggled to reorganize scattered remnants. Even elite German units, such as the 2nd SS Panzer Division and the remnants of Panzerlehr, reported that their soldiers were mentally and physically drained by the pace of the American advance. As U.S. forces crossed the Seine and drove toward Belgium and the Netherlands, German soldiers repeatedly encountered the same pattern. Every position they attempted to hold came under immediate and forceful attack. Every attempt to stabilize the front was disrupted by American mobility and determination. Every defensive pocket that formed eventually collapsed under constant pressure. German intelligence summaries from late August and early September reveal a shift in tone.
Instead of analyzing Allied tactics alone, they increasingly focused on the extraordinary persistence and uninterrupted offensive pressure. One report warned that the Americans continue all attacks with unwavering determination, while another noted that German units were exhausted and discouraged by the enemy's pace. This psychological break was reinforced by the visible signs of collapse. Retreating German soldiers saw abandoned vehicles, lost artillery, and scattered units unable to reform. They saw American mechanized columns pushing east with confidence, supported by a logistical network that provided fuel, food, and ammunition at a tempo Germany could no longer match. The contrast was devastating. American forces appeared tireless. German forces felt depleted. American commanders pushed forward aggressively. German officers struggled to reorganize scattered remnants. Even elite German units, such as the 2nd SS Panzer Division and the remnants of Panzerlehr, reported that their soldiers were mentally and physically drained by the pace of the American advance. As U.S. forces crossed the Seine and drove toward Belgium and the Netherlands, German soldiers repeatedly encountered the same pattern. Every position they attempted to hold came under immediate and forceful attack. Every attempt to stabilize the front was disrupted by American mobility and determination. Every defensive pocket that formed eventually collapsed under constant pressure. The strategic consequences were immense. Germany's western flank, once protected by depth and maneuver, was now collapsing in real time. Reinforcements were scarce, supplies were limited, and the enemy, whose determination had been underestimated for years, was now demonstrating the kind of relentless offensive spirit that German doctrine had once prided itself on. By early September 1944, it was clear to German high command that the U.S. Army had become the dominant force on the Western Front. Their determination, combined with overwhelming logistical and material superiority, had reshaped the battlefield. The German army was no longer fighting a war of maneuver. It was fighting a war of survival. And the consequences of that shift would soon become even more evident as the Americans pressed toward Germany's borders, preparing for battles that would test both armies in ways